Didn't argue, I didn't make a scene. I just picked up my daughter's hand, turned around, and walked back to my car. That's the part people don't understand when I tell this story. They expect me to say I screamed or cried or at least said something. But there is nothing to say. My brother's future in-laws had just handed me a piece of paper, an actual printed list, and my daughter's name was on it, under authorized guests. She's 7 years old. Her name is Penny. She likes horses and strawberry ice cream, and she still sleeps with the stuffed elephant I bought her when she was 2. And someone had decided, in advance, on a printed list, that she was not welcome at an event I was paying for. I should back up. My brother Declan got engaged 18 months ago to a woman named Ivy. I liked Ivy at first. She was sharp, put together, the kind of person who always knew exactly what she wanted. I should have recognized earlier that knowing exactly what you want and not caring who pays for it can go together very easily in certain people. Our parents passed within 2 years of each other. Dad from a heart attack when I was 26, Mom from cancer 2 years later. They left the house to both of us equally, but Declan was 22 at the time and in no position to buy me out, so we agreed I'd hold the asset until he was ready. I sold the house 4 years later, gave him exactly half, and kept my half in a high-yield savings account I'd barely touched. I'm 31 now. I work as a hospital administrator in Cincinnati. I'm divorced, not bitterly, just quietly, the way some marriages end when 2 people realize they were better friends than spouses. My ex-husband co-parents Penny with me on a 2-week rotation, and we're fine. We're actually fine. That part of my life had found its footing. The money from my parents' house, my half, sat for years while I figured out what to do with it. I added to it slowly. By the time Declan got engaged, I had a little over $90,000 in that account. When he called to tell me about the engagement, he was so happy I could hear it through the phone. Genuinely happy, the way he used to sound as a kid on Christmas morning. And I was happy for him. Declan and I aren't close the way some siblings are, but we're not distant either. He's my brother. He's the only family I have left. So when he said Ivy had always dreamed of a big wedding and they were trying to figure out the budget, I said what any older sister might say to her only brother, the one she watched cry at their mother's funeral. Tell me what you need. I did not say, I'll write you a blank check. I want to be clear about that. I said, tell me what you need. What I meant was, I'll help. What I did not mean was, I'll fund the entire thing while your fiancé treats me like a line item. But that's more or less what happened. Ivy's parents contributed nothing. Her father is retired and her mother, I was told, doesn't really do money conversations. Declan was a graphic designer pulling decent but not extravagant money. I sat down with him, just the 2 of us at his kitchen table in March, and we went through the numbers. The venue they wanted was a historic estate outside of Columbus. Rental fee alone was $38,000. Catering, flowers, photographer, band, it added up fast. When the final estimate landed at $72,000, I felt it in my chest. Not anger, just the weight of it. I said, Declan, that's a lot of money. He said, I know, you don't have to do this. But the way he said it, the way he looked at the table when he said it, I knew he needed me to. And I thought about my parents. I thought about how my mother had this cheap little wedding because they were broke at 24 and she always said she didn't regret it. But sometimes I'd catch her looking at bridal magazines with this faraway expression. I thought about how my father used to say Declan was going to do something great someday. I said, I'll cover it. But I'm going to be the one who signs the venue contract and coordinates with the vendors. Not because I don't trust you, but because that's a lot of money and I want to make sure it's handled right. Declan agreed immediately. Ivy agreed when Declan told her, though what she actually said, according to him, was fine, as long as everything gets approved through me. I should have heard that differently than I did. The next 4 months were a slow education in exactly how Ivy operated. Every decision went through her and her mother, who suddenly had very strong opinions about centerpieces despite not contributing to them. The florist I'd already put a deposit with was swapped out because Ivy found someone more aligned with the vision. The catering menu changed 3 times. Each time, there was an additional cost. And each time, because the contracts were in my name and I was the one managing the vendor relationships, I was the one who absorbed it. I didn't complain. I'm telling you this not to present myself as a saint, because I'm not. I wanted my brother to have this. I kept reminding myself it wasn't about me. What started to erode things was how Ivy talked to me. Not overtly rude, more like I wasn't quite a person in those conversations. I was a resource. She'd call me about a vendor issue the same way you'd call your bank's customer service line: efficient, transactional, slightly impatient if I asked a question. She never once said thank you. In 4 months of planning, she never said it. Not to my face, not in a text, not secondhand through Declan. My daughter came up once in June, about 3 months before the wedding. I mentioned offhandedly that Penny was excited to be the flower girl, and Ivy said with this small, careful pause, "We actually decided to go a different direction with the processional. It's going to be more minimalist." I said, "Oh, Penny's not going to be the flower girl?" "We're not doing a flower girl at all," Ivy said. "We're keeping it clean." I said, "Okay." I told Penny that the plans had changed and she took it better than I expected. She asked if she'd still get to wear a pretty dress, and I said of course, and that was that. I should have known then. The wedding was scheduled for a Saturday in September at 2 in the afternoon at Thornfield Estate just outside Columbus. I drove up with Penny on Friday evening and stayed at a hotel nearby. Penny was excited. She picked out a navy blue dress with a little bow at the back, and she kept asking if we'd see butterflies in the garden. Saturday morning, I got a call from the estate's event coordinator, a woman named Dana, just to confirm final headcounts and timing. Everything was on track. I had final confirmation from the caterer, the florist, the photographer. I'd transferred the last payment installment the week before. All of it was buttoned up. We arrived at Thornfield at 1:15. The estate was genuinely beautiful. Old stone walls, a rose garden, a fountain in the center courtyard that I'd specified in the contract had to be running during guest arrival. It was running. The flowers looked right. The chairs in the ceremony garden were set in perfect rows. Penny was holding my hand and turning in a slow circle, trying to take it all in, when a man in a dark jacket stepped in front of us near the entry gate. He was polite about it. That's what I keep coming back to, how polite he was about it. Like that made it better. "Ma'am, I need to check your names against the guest list." I told him my name. He checked. He found it, nodded, and was about to wave me through when I said, "And my daughter, Penny." He looked at his list. He looked again. He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, separate from the main list, I noticed, and unfolded it slowly. "I'm sorry," he said. "I've been asked to note that this guest is not permitted entry." I stared at him. "She's 7. "Yes, ma'am." "Her uncle is the groom." "I understand. I'm just following instructions." He held up the paper so I could see it. It was printed. Professional looking, like someone had taken real time to format it. There were 4 names on it. Penny's was the 3rd. I don't remember making a decision to leave. I just felt Penny's hand in mine, and I turned around and we walked back to the car. She asked me in the parking lot in this very small voice, did I do something wrong? I crouched down in front of her. I held both her hands. I said, "No, you did nothing wrong, not one single thing." She nodded, but didn't fully believe me. I could tell by the way she looked at the ground. I buckled her into her seat. I sat in the driver's seat. I did not start the car. My phone had 3 texts from Declan asking where I was. I didn't answer. I sat there and I thought about the contract in my email. The one in my name. The one that I had signed as the responsible party for the entire event. The one that gave me, legally, the right to request modifications to the day of execution through the estate coordinator. I called Danae. She answered on the 2nd ring, professional and brisk. I explained who I was. She knew my name immediately. Of course she did. I was the signatory on everything. I said, Dana, I need to inform you of a change to today's event. I'm invoking the signatory modification clause in our contract. I need you to begin the process of closing down the event. All services should cease immediately. There was a pause. Miss Harmon, she said carefully, are you certain? I'm certain. Another pause. I'll need to notify my manager. Please do. I'll hold. While I held, my phone started ringing. Declan, I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. Then a number I didn't recognize, which turned out later to be Ivy's phone, since she'd apparently thrown her own across the room. Dana came back. We're initiating the shutdown per the contract terms. Per our agreement, since this is a signatory authorized cancellation rather than a no-show, the standard cancellation penalty does not apply to funds already remitted. In plain English, I was getting the money back. I said, Thank you, Dana. I'm sorry for the disruption. She said very quietly, I hope everything works out. I think she understood more than she let on. I was still sitting in the parking lot when it started. First the fountain. I could see it from where I'd parked, through the iron fence. It sputtered once and went still. Then the string lights that had been strung through the rose garden went dark, even in the afternoon sun when you could barely tell. Then the catering vans, which I could see near the service entrance, stopped their activity. Guests were starting to arrive. I watched them slow near the gate, look confused, check their phones. My phone rang again. A number I didn't know. I almost let it go, but something made me answer. Is this Rachel Harmon? A man's voice. Calm. Measured. The kind of calm that comes from a lifetime of handling difficult situations. Yes. My name is Warren Aldridge. I'm the father of the groom. I waited. I owe you an apology, he said. I just found out what was on that list. My son told me right now, when he realized you'd left and why. I want you to know that I had no knowledge of it, and neither did my son. This was Ivy's decision, made with her mother. I said, I know Declan wouldn't have done this. He's not in a good place right now. A pause. I understand you've already initiated the shutdown. Yes. I'm not calling to ask you to reverse it. Another pause, longer this time. I'm calling because I think you deserve to hear that someone on this end is horrified, and because I want you to know that whatever happens today, I will make sure my son understands exactly what his fiancée did. After he hung up, I sat with Penny for a little while. She had fallen asleep in her car seat, her chin tipped down, her navy dress spread around her like a little puddle of fabric. I took a picture of her because she looked so peaceful and I needed something to look at that made sense. My phone was full of messages. My brother, Ivy's mother, two of my aunts who'd apparently gotten word, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 3 years who texted, "How could you?" in all caps. I read them all. I didn't answer any. Declan called 17 times before he showed up in the parking lot himself. He was still in his suit, a gray morning suit, well-fitted, the kind of suit my mother would have loved to see him in. He was walking fast, and his face was doing too many things at once. I got out of the car and met him halfway. Rachel. Rachel. She put Penny on a restricted list, I said. On paper, printed, with her name. I didn't know. I know you didn't. That's the only reason I'm talking to you right now instead of driving home. He ran a hand through his hair. He looked back toward the estate, where guests were now milling near the gate in small, confused clusters. The wedding was visibly, undeniably over. She said, Ivy said she was worried Penny would cause a disruption, that you'd use her to make the day about yourself. I looked at him for a long time. She's 7, Declan. She thinks butterflies are magic, and she sleeps with an elephant named Graham. What disruption was she going to cause? He didn't have an answer. I don't think he'd had a good answer since the moment he'd found out, probably 30 minutes earlier when everything was already unraveling. I said, I want you to hear me clearly because I'm only going to say this once. I loved you enough to give you everything in my savings account for this wedding, everything Mom and Dad left us. I did that because I wanted you to have something beautiful. And the woman you chose to marry looked at my daughter, a 7-year-old girl who asked if she could wear a pretty dress, and put her on a list, a printed list, with her name on it. He was quiet for so long I thought he might not say anything. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Rachel." "I know you are." I put my hand on his arm, briefly. "Figure out who she is. Really figure it out before you sign anything else." I drove home with Penny sleeping in the back seat. The drive from Columbus to Cincinnati is about 2 hours, and I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove and let the miles pass and thought about my parents, the way I always seem to when something big happens. I thought about my mother and her bridal magazines and her faraway expression. I thought about my father saying Declan would do something great someday. I hoped he still would. I hoped he'd do something brave first. The refund from Thornfield processed in full within 5 business days. $68,000 back in my account because I was the one who had signed the contract, and I was the one who had the right to end it. Warren Aldridge called me one more time, about a week later. He told me Declan had broken off the engagement. He told me Declan was not doing well, but that he was going to be okay. He said he hoped, whenever things settled, that Declan and I could find our way back to each other. I told him I hoped that too, and I meant it. I wasn't angry at my brother anymore by then. Anger is a fire, and it burns. It burns and then it goes out. What I felt by the end of that week was something quieter and harder to name. Something like grief, but also something like clarity. I had gone to that estate thinking I was giving my brother a gift. What I was actually doing, I think, was trying to buy back something I'd lost when my parents died. That sense that my family was a real thing, a solid thing, something I could stand on. You can't buy that. I know that now. What you can do is pick up your daughter's hand, walk back to your car, and make sure she knows she didn't do anything wrong. Penny asked me a few days later, very casually over cereal, whether Uncle Declan was still getting married. I said no. The plans had changed. She nodded and took a bite and said, "Are we going to see him still?" I said I thought so. I said we'd have him over for dinner when he was ready. She seemed satisfied with that. She asked if she could still wear the navy dress on a special occasion, and I said absolutely any time she wanted. She wore it to her school's fall concert 3 weeks later. She sat in the second row and sang so loudly I could hear her specifically above all the other kids. I sat in the audience and I clapped until my hands hurt, and I thought, this is what the money was always for. Not a venue, not a fountain, not flowers that would be dead by morning. I keep coming back to that parking lot. The fountain I could see through the iron fence, still running, Penny asleep in her car seat in that navy dress. The silence after I hung up with Dana. People want revenge stories to feel like explosions. They want screaming and confrontation and a moment where the hero says exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. But that's not what it felt like from the inside. From the inside, it felt like grief with very clean edges. What happened to me, what happened to Penny, didn't occur because Ivy was unusually evil. It happened because I let a pattern build, one small concession at a time, until the pattern had its own momentum. Every time I absorbed an extra cost without saying anything, every time I accepted a decision I disagreed with because I didn't want to make things harder for Declan, I was teaching everyone around me exactly how much I was willing to tolerate. People learn from what you accept, not from what you say you value. That's not a moral judgment. That's just how it works. The thing I'm most grateful for, and it took me a while to land on this word, grateful, but it's the right one, is that I had prepared myself before I ever needed to act. The contract was in my name because I was careful, not because I was planning to burn the wedding down. I never wanted to use that clause, but because I'd thought clearly when emotions weren't running the room, I had something solid to stand on when they were. That clarity, built quietly in a kitchen in March with spreadsheets and a cup of coffee, is what made everything else possible. You can't think your way out of a crisis in the moment if you haven't already done the thinking. And then there's the question of what it takes to actually do it. To call Dana. To sit in that parking lot and not answer Declan's calls. To let the fountain go still and watch the guests cluster at the gate in confusion, knowing some of them would never forgive me for it. That part wasn't smart or strategic. That part was just something I had to hold inside my chest and not put down. I've had harder things to hold. My mother's last 6 months. My divorce. But this had its own weight, because it meant choosing my daughter's dignity over everyone's comfort, including my own. Declan and I had dinner last month. Just the two of us, at a diner halfway between Columbus and Cincinnati, the kind of place with laminated menus and good pie. He looked tired but steadier than I expected. He said he'd been in therapy. He said he was sorry, again, but differently this time. The way you apologize when you've had enough time to really understand what you're apologizing for. I told him I wasn't angry anymore. That was true. I told him I needed him to be someone Penny could count on. That was the condition, the only one, and he understood it without me having to say it twice. Penny wore the navy dress to her school concert. She sang in the second row with everything she had. I clapped until my hands hurt, and I thought, this is the only scoreboard that matters. Not the money I got back, not the vendors who sent me apologetic emails, not Ivy's name in a police report. Just this, my daughter, undiminished, singing at the top of her lungs in a dress with a little bow at the back, not knowing and never needing to know how hard I had to hold on to keep her that way.